Before we begin this journey into ancient Egypt, before we step into the dust of forgotten paths and the quiet rhythm of lives lived long before our own, take a moment to imagine a world shaped not by kings or monuments, but by the countless ordinary people who carried a civilization on their shoulders, people whose stories were never written, yet whose lives formed the heartbeat of an empire. This video follows one such life. Not a pharaoh, not a noble, not a scribe, but a commoner, someone born into simplicity, raised in routine and shaped by the land and the river that sustained all of Egypt. Through their eyes we explore the full arc of human existence, from the first unsteady steps of childhood, through the restless transformation of youth, and into the long, steady years of adulthood. We begin in childhood, a time of curiosity and small freedoms, a time when the world feels wide, even within the narrow alleys of a village, when games are played in the dust, when laughter echoes between mud brick walls, when learning comes not from scrolls, but from watching, imitating, absorbing the rhythm of daily life. Childhood in ancient Egypt was brief, yet filled with wonder, shaped by family, by community, and by the ever-present Nile. Then we move into youth, a time of transition, when innocence fades and responsibility begins to settle onto young shoulders, when bodies grow stronger, when skills are learned, when expectations rise. Youth was not a time of rebellion or leisure, but a bridge between dependence and duty, a period where identity formed quietly through work, through training, through the first glimpses of the adult world waiting ahead. It was a time of learning one's place, one's role, one's future. And finally, we enter adulthood, the longest and heaviest chapter, where routine becomes the structure of life, where labor shapes the body, where family becomes both purpose and burden. Adulthood in ancient Egypt was defined by endurance, by providing, by surviving, by carrying the weight of seasons, harvests, taxes, and time itself. It was a life lived close to the land, close to the river, close to the fragile balance that sustained every household. Through these stages, we follow not a hero, but a human, someone who lived a life that mirrors millions of others across centuries, someone whose story was never carved into stone, yet reflects the quiet strength that built a civilization. Their journey reminds us that history is not only the story of rulers and battles, but of ordinary people who lived, worked, loved, aged, and passed on, leaving behind no monuments, only the echo of their existence carried forward by those who came after. As you listen, allow yourself to drift into their world. Let the sounds of ancient life settle around you, the soft rush of the Nile, the distant calls from the fields, the murmur of families preparing for the day. Let the pace slow, let the mind soften. Let the story guide you gently through the stages of a life lived in harmony with the land, a life shaped by duty, by community, and by the quiet persistence of the human spirit. This is the story of childhood, youth, and adulthood in ancient Egypt, a story told not through grand events, but through the small, steady moments that define what it means to live. And as we begin, step with me into their footsteps, and let their world unfold around you, one breath, one memory, one season at a time. The child was born near the edge of the Nile at a time when the air was still cool and quiet. Before the sun had fully risen above the horizon, his mother labored on the packed earth floor of their modest mud brick home, surrounded by the soft sounds of the river moving steadily nearby, the low voices of family members waiting outside, and the distant cries of birds waking for the day. Life began without ceremony, without celebration, simply because it had to. This was how most lives began in ancient Egypt, quietly, surrounded by routine and necessity. The home into which he was born was small and practical, built from sun-dried mud bricks, shaped by hand, and stacked carefully to form thick walls. These walls helped keep the heat out during the day and offered some protection during cooler nights. The roof was flat and made of palm branches layered with mud, often used as a sleeping space when the nights became too warm inside. Inside the house there were few objects: clay jars for water and grain, woven baskets for storage, simple tools, and mats rolled out at night and stacked during the day. Nothing was excessive, nothing was decorative. Everything served a purpose from the very beginning. The child's life was shaped by the Nile, even before he understood what the river was. Its presence could be felt in the air, in the humidity, in the rhythm of the days. The adults spoke of it often, sometimes with gratitude, sometimes with quiet concern. They knew the river brought life. But they also knew it could bring hardship. A flood that was too weak or too strong could mean hunger. Disease or lost infancy was a fragile time. Many children did not survive their first years. Illness was common. Infections spread easily. And there was little that could be done beyond basic remedies, prayers, and the use of protective amulets. His parents watched him carefully, responding to every sound, every sign of weakness. They had seen loss before, as most families had, and so love was present, but restrained, careful, shaped by experience and uncertainty when the child cried. His mother soothed him with quiet songs, passed down through generations. These were not songs of joy or excitement, but slow, repetitive melodies meant to calm and steady. Songs that spoke of the sun's daily journey, of the river's eternal flow, of gods who watch silently over the land. These sounds formed the earliest sense of comfort, safety, and belonging as the child grew and began to move on his own. His world slowly expanded. He learned the texture of the earth beneath his hands, the warmth of sunlight at the doorway, the smells of cooking grain and river water. He became familiar with the animals kept near the home: goats, chickens, sometimes a donkey. He learned which creatures were safe and which were dangerous, which sounds signaled calm and which meant warning fire was both useful and dangerous. Water was essential but unpredictable. Sharp tools lay within sight but out of reach. Adults corrected him quickly when he moved too close to danger. Discipline was firm, sometimes harsh, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. In a world where mistakes could be fatal, obedience was survival. By the time he could walk confidently, he followed his mother everywhere, watching her grind grain between heavy stones, bake bread in clay ovens, fetch water from the river in large jars that strained her body. These tasks were repeated every day, often several times, and though exhausting, they ensured survival. Food was not guaranteed. It had to be earned constantly through labor. Childhood in ancient Egypt was not separate from adulthood. There was no clear boundary between play and work. From an early age, the child was expected to help in small ways: carrying light baskets, watching younger siblings, chasing birds away from stored grain. Each task reinforced his role within the family and the community. He was not raised to discover himself, but to become useful. There was no formal education for children like him. Reading and writing were skills reserved for scribes and officials, for common families. Knowledge was practical and passed down through observation and repetition. When to plant, how to harvest, how to recognize illness, how to show respect to elders and the gods. These lessons were learned through daily life rather than instruction. Evenings were often the only time for rest. Families gathered together after the heat of the day faded, sitting close, sharing simple meals, escaping insects and exhaustion. Stories were told quietly. Stories of gods, of creation, of judgment after death. These stories shaped the child's understanding of right and wrong, order and chaos, reward and punishment. He learned early that the gods were always watching. that the heart would one day be weighed, that obedience and proper behavior mattered deeply. These beliefs were not abstract ideas, but living rules that guided daily behavior. Fear of divine judgment was a constant presence, subtle but powerful despite the hardships. Childhood was not without moments of lightness. The river offered brief relief from labor. Children played in shallow waters, splashed each other, laughed as they shaped wet mud into crude forms. They chased insects, played games with stones and sticks, and imagined worlds beyond their immediate surroundings. These moments were short but meaningful. Offering a sense of freedom within strict limits, danger was always present. Crocodiles lived in the river. Snakes hid in tall grass. Disease spread easily through the village. Parents remained alert. Voices raised sharply when children wandered too far. Physical punishment was common and accepted, meant to correct behavior quickly and prevent fatal mistakes. As the child grew older, hunger became familiar, not constant, but recurring. During years when floods were poor or crops failed, food became scarce, portions were reduced. Meals were skipped, children felt hunger deeply. Their bodies growing faster than food supplies could support, hunger was rarely discussed openly. But it was understood by everyone. The seasons dictated life completely. During the annual inundation, when the Nile flooded the fields, normal work paused, but anxiety increased. Families waited for the waters to recede, uncertain of what would remain. During planting and harvest seasons, work intensified. Days were long, exhausting, and repetitive. Children worked alongside adults, their small bodies pushed to their limits. Learning endurance early emotionally, childhood was shaped by closeness and restraint. Families depended on one another completely. Yet affection was expressed through action rather than words. Love meant protection, guidance, and shared labor. Death was common. Neighbors, relatives, siblings passed away regularly. Children learned to accept loss without ceremony. Grief existed, but life demanded continuation. Religion offered structure to this reality. Small household shrines held simple offerings of bread and beer. Parents taught children how to show respect, how to speak prayers, how to honor ancestors. These rituals provided a sense of meaning and order in a world that could feel unpredictable and harsh. As childhood drew to a close, responsibilities increased quietly. Expectations hardened. The child understood that his future would likely mirror his father's. Working the land, obeying authority, offering labor and grain as tax. His body grew lean and strong, shaped by sun and work. His mind settled into routine, shaped by repetition and belief. There was little talk of dreams or change. Survival itself was the goal. Stability was the reward. The river continued to flow. The sun rose each morning, and the gods maintained order as long as people fulfilled their roles. Childhood ended not with a moment, but with a gradual acceptance of responsibility. This was the foundation of his life, built slowly through repetition, hardship, belief, and endurance. A beginning shaped quietly beneath the vast sky of ancient Egypt. As the child continued to grow, his awareness of the world around him deepened slowly, not through explanation, but through repetition. He noticed patterns long before he understood meaning. The way mornings always began with movement and purpose, the way evenings softened into quiet, the way adults spoke differently when the river behaved unexpectedly. These observations formed an unspoken education. Shaping his understanding of stability and risk, he learned to read the expressions of his parents, to recognize fatigue, concern, and relief without words. When harvests were good, there was calm in their movements. When uncertainty lingered, voices lowered, meals grew simpler, and patience shortened. Children absorbed these shifts instinctively, adjusting their behavior to match the mood of the household. The physical environment left a lasting impression on his senses. The smell of damp earth after the floodwaters receded, the rough texture of dried mud beneath bare feet, the constant presence of insects buzzing in the heat, these sensations became normal, unremarkable, woven into daily existence. Comfort was not defined by softness or ease, but by familiarity as his body strengthened. Expectations increased, tasks became heavier, walks longer, days more demanding. He was taught how to carry water without spilling, how to handle tools carefully, how to work alongside others without slowing them down. Mistakes were corrected immediately, often with sharp words or physical discipline, not out of anger. But because inefficiency threatened survival, the concept of authority became clear early. Elders were obeyed without question. Overseers were feared. Officials were respected and avoided. The child learned his place within this hierarchy. Small, replaceable, yet necessary. This understanding settled quietly into his identity, shaping how he moved through the world. Festivals offered brief interruptions to routine. Religious holidays marked by offerings, music, and communal gatherings allowed moments of shared relief. Children watched as adults prepared food more carefully, wore cleaner garments, and spoke prayers aloud. These events were rare but memorable, reinforcing belief and community, offering structure to time beyond daily labor. Yet even during celebrations, caution remained. Resources were never wasted. Excess was avoided. The memory of hunger lingered beneath every moment of abundance. Reminding families that fortune could shift quickly, illness remained a constant threat. Fevers, infections, and injuries appeared suddenly and often spread through households. The child witnessed suffering without explanation. Neighbors weakened, elders passed quietly. Children disappeared from daily life. Death was acknowledged but not dwelled upon. Mourning was brief. Because survival required attention to the living through these experiences, the child learned emotional restraint. Tears were acceptable, but prolonged grief was discouraged. Strength was measured not by feeling, but by endurance. This emotional discipline became part of adulthood long before childhood truly ended at night. As the family settled into rest, the child lay listening to familiar sounds. Insects chirring, distant water moving, occasional voices carried through the darkness. Sleep came easily after long days of work and heat. Dreams were shaped by repetition rather than imagination. Often reflecting daily life rather than fantasy, fear existed quietly. Fear of the river rising too high, fear of crops failing, fear of illness, fear of displeasing the gods. These fears were not spoken often, but they guided behavior, encouraging obedience, caution, and respect for tradition. Gradually, the child began to understand that life was not meant to be questioned, but followed. The path ahead was clear, not because it was chosen, but because alternatives did not exist. This acceptance was neither tragic nor hopeful. It was simply reality. By the time childhood fully faded, the foundations of adulthood were firmly set. The rhythms of labor, belief, discipline, and endurance were internalized, shaping a person prepared not for ambition, but for continuity. This extended childhood, shaped by repetition rather than novelty, prepared him for a life that would mirror generations before him, steady, demanding, and deeply connected to the land and the river that sustained it. As the child moved closer to the age where strength mattered more than play, daily routines became heavier and more predictable. Mornings began earlier. Bodies rose before the sun fully warmed the land, and there was less time for wandering or idle curiosity. The child learned to wake without complaint, understanding that hesitation only delayed work tasks, once given as lessons, now became expectations. Carrying water was no longer symbolic. Baskets were no longer light. And watching over animals required constant attention. Mistakes were tolerated less. Patience grew thinner. and responsibility settled quietly on young shoulders. The body adapted gradually, muscles forming through repetition rather than intention. Hands toughened from contact with tools and rough materials. Skin darkened and hardened under constant exposure to the sun. Discomfort became normal, pain temporary. Exhaustion expected alongside physical change came awareness. The child began to recognize patterns beyond the household, observing how some families struggled more than others, how overseers spoke differently to adults than to children, how authority moved through the village without being questioned. These observations were not discussed, but they were remembered. Hunger continued to shape behavior, not always severe, but persistent enough to influence choices. Meals were eaten without waste, portions accepted without complaint. The idea of abundance remained distant and rare. Even during times of relative plenty, restraint was practiced instinctively. Fear, once vague and distant, became more specific. Fear of failing expectations, fear of punishment, fear of bringing hardship upon the family through carelessness. These fears encouraged discipline and attention, reinforcing the values that had been taught since infancy. Religion remained a quiet presence, no longer just stories, but explanations for hardship and reward. Prayers were spoken more seriously, offerings made with intention. The child learned that endurance itself was a form of devotion, that labor honored both family and gods. Even moments of rest began to change. Play gave way to quiet observation, sitting beside adults, listening rather than speaking, absorbing the rhythms of conversation in silence. Sleep came deeper, heavier, earned through long days rather than childhood ease. The sense of time also shifted. Days blurred together, seasons felt shorter, and the future seemed less abstract. There was an unspoken understanding that childhood was narrowing, that soon expectations would fully align with those placed on grown bodies. Without ceremony or announcement, preparation had begun, not for a new life, but for continuation. The child stood at the edge of something familiar yet heavier, shaped by everything learned so far, ready to step into the next rhythm of existence. Adulthood arrived quietly, without ceremony, without a clear boundary, slipping into life the way dawn slips into the sky, soft and unnoticed, one year blending into the next, familiar and predictable, the body still strong, yet no longer endless in its energy. Mornings shifting first, the body waking already aware of the day ahead. Muscles heavy before movement began, breath slower, joints less forgiving. Routine replacing expectation, survival replacing curiosity, and the world settling into a rhythm that felt both comforting and unyielding. Work remained the center of life, unchanged in form but heavier in consequence. The fields still demanding labor, the canals still needing guiding, the animals still requiring care, yet every effort now carrying cost. Each movement measured unconsciously, reserved for later hours, saved for tasks that could not be avoided. Restraint learned not from wisdom, but from necessity. The adult commoner understanding that strength was no longer something to spend freely, but something to ration carefully. The sun rose indifferent to age, its heat pressing down with the same weight it always had. Sweat coming sooner, lingering longer, recovery slowing. Short rests becoming essential rather than optional. The body adapting, not by growing stronger, but by becoming efficient, conserving what it could, spending only what was required, and learning to move with the land rather than against it. The seasons shaped everything. Inundation, emergence, harvest, each bringing its own rhythm. During the flood, when the Nile swelled and covered the fields, labor shifted to repairing canals, hauling stone, or serving in state projects. The river's rise both a blessing and a burden, its waters renewing the soil while suspending the familiar routines of farming. During emergence, when the soil softened and grew rich, planting demanded long days bent low, hands deep in earth, seeds pressed into mud that promised life months later. During harvest, every able body worked from dawn to dusk, gathering grain before heat or wind could steal it. Life tied completely to the river's pulse. Adulthood meaning understanding its moods intimately, reading its currents, its sense, its timing, knowing that prosperity or hunger depended on its generosity. Marriage settled into partnership, no longer defined by emotion, but by function. Shared labor shaping the relationship more than words. Tasks dividing naturally, understanding built through repetition. A glance communicating more than a conversation. Conflict existing, but remaining quiet. Survival leaving little room for prolonged disagreement. Harmony becoming a requirement rather than a luxury. And affection expressed through action rather than speech. A repaired tool, a shared meal, a steady presence at the end of a long day. The home reflected this practicality. Walls of mud brick cool in the morning and warm by afternoon. A single room for sleeping, another for storage. A courtyard where most life unfolded, cooking fires crackling softly, grinding stones scraping rhythmically, children's footsteps pattering across packed earth. The house simple, yet holding everything that mattered. Its imperfections familiar, its spaces shaped by habit and necessity. Its air filled with the sense of bread, smoke, and earth. Children filled the household. Some loud, some quiet, some absent too soon. Parenting balancing care with realism. Affection expressed through provision rather than tenderness. A full belly, a repaired garment, a safe place to sleep. These becoming the gestures of love. Illness creating tension. Each fever watched closely. Hope tempered by experience. Loss endured silently when it came. Folded into the rhythm of life. Grief softened by the demands of survival. Sorrow carried quietly so that work could continue. Providing for others sharpened every decision. Risk becoming something to avoid rather than challenge. Crops planned conservatively, reserves guarded carefully. Effort distributed evenly to prevent exhaustion. The adult commoner understanding that collapse helped no one. Strength measured not by boldness, but by consistency. And every choice weighed against the needs of the household. Hunger changed form with age, less sharp, but more constant. The body demanding steady fuel, meals remaining simple. Bread and beer forming the base, onions, lentils. And fish appearing when fortune allowed, pleasure mattering less than consistency. Eating becoming maintenance rather than enjoyment. The flavors familiar, the portions predictable. The act of eating more about sustaining labor than satisfying desire. Authority loomed larger with adulthood. Obligations increasing, taxes following productivity. Officials appearing regularly, measuring output without regard for strain. Compliance becoming instinctive, resistance pointless. The adult commoner preparing carefully for inspections. Ensuring quotas were met even if reserves suffered. A miscalculation meaning debt, and debt meaning forced labor. The presence of scribes and overseers, a constant reminder that life was not entirely one's own. The market offered brief relief from routine, vendors calling out softly. Exchanging goods through barter more often than coin. Baskets, pottery, cloth, herbs, each item carrying the touch of someone's labor. Conversations short, prices predictable. The market a place of necessity rather than indulgence. Yet still a momentary shift in the day's rhythm. A chance to hear new voices, see new faces, and feel the pulse of the wider community. Social life narrowed naturally, time and energy limiting interaction. Community remaining essential, but distant. Relationships built on shared history rather than active engagement. Conversations focusing on work, weather, and survival. Humor existing but subdued. Laughter quiet and brief. Companionship expressed through presence rather than words. Neighbors helping when needed, borrowing tools, sharing water, offering hands during harvest or illness, the bonds practical rather than sentimental. Religion provided structure rather than escape, rituals offering familiarity, belief explaining suffering without promising relief, prayers asking for stability rather than improvement, acceptance replacing hope, small household shrines tended daily, offerings of bread or beer left with quiet sincerity, the gods woven into every task, every fear, every moment of gratitude. The divine seen not as distant rulers, but as forces intertwined with the land, the river, the sky, and the fragile balance of life. Festivals continued, but participation softened. Energy limited, observation replacing involvement. The adult commoner attending when possible, standing quietly at the edge of crowds, watching others dance, content simply to be present. The music familiar, the colors bright, the celebration a reminder of continuity rather than joy. A moment to witness the community's endurance, to feel part of something larger, even if only as a silent observer. As years passed, strength declined gradually. Tasks once effortless requiring planning, younger workers assuming heavier roles. Transition occurring without announcement. Tools passing naturally to stronger hands, pride yielding to practicality. The adult commoner learning to contribute without dominating, to step aside without resentment, to accept that time reshapes every body. Every role, every expectation, supervision replaced labor when possible. Advice offered cautiously, experience valued, but not celebrated. The older worker guiding rather than doing. Teaching through example rather than instruction. Presence becoming contribution. The rhythm of work continuing even as one's place within it shifted. Dependence increased slowly, assistance accepted without shame. Family support becoming essential, care reciprocated for years of provision. Life maintaining balance through mutual reliance. The household adjusting naturally to shifting abilities. Younger hands lifting what older hands could no longer manage. Older voices offering wisdom in return. Time altered perception. Days stretching longer. Seasons blurring. Memory softening hardship. Routine replacing reflection. Life not evaluated, but simply continued. The past becoming a collection of impressions rather than events. The future shrinking to manageable pieces. The present becoming the only space that truly mattered. Loss became frequent. Peers weakening. Elders disappearing. Absence accumulating quietly. Grief acknowledged briefly and absorbed into daily rhythm. Work continuing regardless. The community adjusting silently to each departure. The cycle of life and death accepted as part of the land's design. Sorrow softened by familiarity. The body carried history openly now, posture bending slightly. Steps shortening, breath growing heavier. Endurance remaining, but sustained by habit rather than strength. Pain integrating into movement, acknowledged but rarely spoken of. Discomfort becoming a familiar companion. The body no longer a tool of ambition, but a vessel of persistence. Eventually labor reduced further, observation replacing participation. Time spent resting increasing, sitting near familiar spaces. Watching others perform tasks once carried by their own hands. The world continuing at its steady pace, unchanged by individual decline. The sounds of work becoming a kind of comfort. A reminder that life continued even as one's role diminished. Comfort emerged from familiarity. Familiar sounds, familiar voices, familiar routines. Stability persisting even as ability diminished. The home becoming both anchor and boundary. The courtyard a world of its own. The shade of a single tree offering more solace than any distant dream. Awareness of mortality deepened without fear. Death no longer distant, but expected, accepted, prepared for quietly. Rituals providing reassurance, belief softening uncertainty. The end understood as continuation rather than disappearance. The journey seen as part of a cycle rather than a conclusion, as strength faded, rest dominated, energy conserved instinctively, effort limited to essentials, life narrowing without distress, presence becoming quieter, movement slower, thoughts gentler, the world experienced more through listening than doing. The sounds of family, of neighbors, of the river, forming the backdrop of final years. The final years passed slowly, measured by days rather than seasons. Dependence complete, presence soft, words fewer, observation deeper, the world shrinking to the space one could see from a doorway or a shaded corner. The mind drifting between memory and the present. The body gradually releasing its hold on labor, on responsibility, on life itself. The body eventually ceased, without urgency or resistance. Simply unable to continue, no monument marking the end. No record preserving the life. The passing quiet, the transition natural. The individual absorbed back into the rhythm that had shaped every moment, the land receiving what it had sustained. Work resumed, fields tended, children grew, the river flowed. Life continued uninterrupted, the world unchanged by a single absence, yet shaped by countless lives lived in quiet endurance. Adulthood for a commoner in ancient Egypt, defined not by ambition or achievement, but by responsibility, persistence, and gradual release, a life carried forward by routine, sustained by community, and concluded with acceptance. And so the story of adulthood in ancient Egypt drifts toward its end, carried gently on the same quiet current that shaped every life along the Nile. A life built not on grand achievements or recorded triumphs, but on steady hands, patient endurance, and the soft persistence of ordinary days. The kind of days that rarely earn a place in history, yet form the foundation of everything history is built upon. When we look back across the centuries, it is easy to see only the monuments, the temples, the statues carved in stone. But behind each stone stood countless commoners whose names were never written, whose voices were never preserved, whose footsteps faded into the dust long before the monuments they helped raise began to crumble. Their lives simple, their routines repetitive, yet their presence essential, shaping the world quietly. One harvest, one sunrise, one breath at a time. The adult commoner lived in rhythm with the land, with the river, with the seasons. Their days guided by forces larger than themselves, by the rising of the Nile, by the turning of the sun, by the demands of family and community. And though their world was small, it was complete, filled with tasks that mattered, relationships that endured, and beliefs that offered comfort when answers could not be found. In their homes of mud brick and packed earth, they built lives defined by responsibility, by care, by the slow accumulation of experience. They learned to read the soil, the weather, the moods of animals, the needs of children. They learned to accept what could not be changed and to work patiently with what could. Their wisdom practical, their resilience quiet, their strength woven into the fabric of each passing day. And as the years moved forward, as bodies aged and roles shifted, they discovered a different kind of purpose, one rooted not in labor, but in presence, in guiding younger hands, in offering steady words, in simply remaining part of the world they had helped sustain. Their value no longer measured in physical strength, but in the calm understanding that comes only from a lifetime of repetition, of effort, of survival. When the final years arrived, they came without fear, without resistance, welcomed with the same acceptance that shaped every stage of life, death seen not as an ending, but as a return, a quiet release into the same cycle that had carried ancestors before them and would carry descendants long after, the body resting, the spirit continuing, the world moving gently forward. And though no monuments marked their passing, though no scrolls recorded their names, their lives mattered not because they were extraordinary, but because they were human, because they endured, because they loved in the ways they could, provided in the ways they knew, and contributed to a civilization that still echoes through time. As we leave their world behind, we carry with us a reminder of the quiet dignity found in ordinary life, the beauty of routine, the strength in persistence, the softness in acceptance, and the deep, steady heartbeat of a people who lived close to the land, close to each other, and close to the rhythms that shaped their existence. The Nile continues to flow, as it always has, as it always will, carrying with it the memory of countless lives lived along its banks, lives humble yet meaningful, fragile yet enduring, forgotten by history yet essential to it. And as the river moves, so too does the story of the commoner, drifting gently into the distance, leaving behind a whisper of their world, a world built on endurance, responsibility, and quiet grace. And now, as this journey comes to a close, allow the stillness of their lives to settle around you. Let the calm of their routines soften your thoughts. Let the slow rhythm of their days ease your breath. And let the gentle flow of their story guide you into rest, into quiet, into sleep, for their world was peaceful in its simplicity, steady in its repetition, and perhaps in listening to it, you can feel a little of that peace yourself, carried softly, like the river, into the night